I want to show an example of what the Rams do a lot of. I've circled two players for LA. These are their two safeties, and you see them both pretty far deep. Now, this doesn't always mean they're going to stay deep. In fact, on this play, one of them is going to crash in, but this is mostly what they do. They have two safeties deep on a good chunk of their coverages. Now, it's football in 2022. Nobody just plays one coverage for the entire game. You're going to mix stuff up. Pete Carroll plays just one coverage the entire game. But other than that, you're going to mix stuff up. This kind of play is what they typically like to do. It's what you call quarters coverage. Now, again, a lot of different stuff they'll do, but the one thing they tend to be pretty consistent on is trying to get as many two safety deep coverages in a football game as possible. They started this last year with Brandon Staley and are continuing it now with their defensive coordinator, Raheem Morris. On this play, Tampa Bay is going to run it and pick up a few yards. Actually, a pretty decent run there, but that's not really the point. The point is this is what the Rams do, which, okay, fine. There's clear ways to beat it, like running the football, like underneath stuff, but there's obviously clear advantages in having two safeties deep. It's more difficult to push the ball down the field. But what's really fascinating about this matchup, and this is the first thing I thought of once I realized these were the two teams playing each other in the Super Bowl, is that Cincinnati has performed far better when going up against teams that don't run these types of coverages than when going up against teams that do. So right here, here's a chart, and I gotta explain it a little bit because it's hard to figure out exactly these kind of things because the data doesn't exist, it's not out there. But I wanted to see how well did they do against teams that typically play a lot of two safety deep coverages and teams that don't. So their points per game versus teams that on average run two safety deep coverages is 19.4, and against teams that do not, it's 35.2. That's a huge jump. But again, how I got this data, just to be very clear, I just arbitrarily looked at each team and said, yeah, they tend to play more cover two, or yeah, they don't. I didn't go back and watch every single snap, so it's possible there is some flaw in the data. This is not perfectly scientific, but it does kind of go to show a little bit of, even though it might have some issues, there's a clear difference when they're going up against teams that like to play one safety and like to play two safeties deep, and this could be a mismatch for Cincinnati. Their record versus two safety deep average teams is just 2-6, whereas their record when they play teams that typically only have one safety deep is 11-1. I mean, that's an incredible jump right there. You're going from losing to the Chicago Bears to being able to beat some of the most dominant teams in football. Although it's worth noting, one of the wins they have against a team that plays a lot of two safety deep coverages was Tennessee, who they beat in the playoffs. So despite these numbers maybe being a bit concerning, it does not mean you are dead in the water if you're a Cincinnati Bengals fan. No, far from it. I mean, we've seen this team work plenty of miracles already this postseason. So why is this? What's the issue? And part of me thought, okay, well, you have guys like T. Higgins and Jamar Chase who are great down the field receivers, but with two safety deep coverages, they're both double teamed if they both run go routes, meaning that you have to find someone else. And while Tyler Boyd is good, it's obviously you're in a better situation with, having guys like Jamar Chase and with T. Higgins. Another theory I had was maybe they just run the ball more against cover two, because that is something that, that's kind of the classic staple of offensive coordinating and of play calling, is just that when teams run two safety deep coverages, you run the football on them, you have one extra guy, to block. So there's logic there. However, looking at the numbers, that's not really true. They, on average, over the season against all coverages, pass the ball 1% over expected, which I've criticized the Bengals for because it should be a lot more than 1%. Like, why are you doing basically league average passing the ball when you have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd? But that's what they do. However, there's not really much of a change. They pass the ball versus two safety deep teams on average 1.5% over expected. So they're basically the same there. And actually, one of those games was minus 11% over expected. That was versus the Chargers. So if you take that out, it goes to 3.3% over expected. Should mention, this is on average, not the overall percentages. This is like the average of each game, just because I don't know how to get the data for the overall percentages. So it's not that Zach Taylor is running the ball too much on these types of games. And again, even the one time he did was against the Chargers, which you can argue they have a bad run defense. There's logic there. And while another aspect I think some people would throw out is, well, they were losing in a lot of these games, so they had to throw the ball more. Well, actually, this data I calculated was I took out when each team had below a 20% chance to win on either side. So once a team had less than a 20% chance to win, it was taken out. That kind of gets rid of garbage time. So I don't think that really had a huge factor. Maybe a slight factor, but I don't think a huge factor. To me, I'm not going to say that it's just because they ran the ball too much. So now let's watch film, because film is still king when it comes to figuring out how teams operate. I think it's still the best way to figure out about teams and to learn about teams. And, we have to go back to that week 2 game. Listen, this is a very different team than what we saw week 2. They are, but still, there are things we can learn there. What's going to happen on this play is it's a cover 2 zone, and you actually have a zone buster to beat this type of coverage. However, right when this play begins, what you're going to notice is that while they do have a player who looks like he is going to get open, the issue is that linebacker Roquan Smith is making a great read, and he's going to basically jump in front of where Burrow wants to make this throw. This is a great play by Roquan Smith. He's a great player, so that's a factor here. But this is basically what Cincinnati has to do against this type of coverage, right? You have to methodically move down the field, and when you do this, issues are going to arise when you have to run 12 plays instead of 5 plays. When Ja'Marr Chase can't just get wide open down the sideline, it could create some more issues. Look, Burrow is going to make this throw, and it's intercepted. Now, Burrow's really cleaned up his mistakes as of late, and he got kind of unlucky with some of these mistakes. Even in this game, there was a very fluky interception. So I'm not sitting here and saying, well, Burrow's going to turn the ball over if he has to throw the ball too much. I think it's totally possible he won't. And I think it's totally possible that he could still methodically move down the field and make the stuff happen. But this just seems to be the thing about the Bengals is they're at their best when they can just push the ball down the field and get one-on-one matchups. And they won't be able to get that down the field too much against the Rams, I would assume so. Now, again, going over to this play, there are ways you can beat a scheme like this. And in fact, let's talk about Brandon Staley, the guy who kind of built the scheme that is similar to the one that the Rams are currently running, where it's, again, this quarters coverage scheme, and you have a receiver who's going to try and get into a gap right there. You can see how this can work. Look, Burrow's going to take the snap, and you are going to see a pretty decent window there. And I know you could argue that the Chargers don't cover as well as the Rams. In fact, it'd be hard to argue the contrary. You could also argue there was a push off there, but whatever. The point still stands that these plays can work. In fact, it's something that the Rams largely did to San Francisco, who also runs a somewhat similar scheme, and the way they were able to beat them. So maybe you take a page from the Rams' own playbook there. That's a fascinating aspect. So there are things you can do. I want to be very clear about that. And even like something like this, you can push the ball down the field. And I think this is what teams need to be more willing to do, is even when your opposing team is having a 2 safety deep coverage, don't be afraid to throw the ball down the field. On this play, what you're going to see is that I've circled a safety on this play because the safeties, what they have to do is, if it's a running play, they have to run in and make a tackle. So you can actually fool them a bit, and if you can get them to freeze, you can hurt them, and they're kind of the guys you can fool, as opposed to typically the guys you're trying to get out of position in zone coverages are, if it's a cover 3, you're more worried about the linebackers. Well, in quarters coverage, quite frankly, the safeties are kind of in a bit of a compromised spot, because watch how he doesn't get to the side quick enough, and now Ja'Marr Chase, who's so good on the sideline, gets wide open. Somehow this ends up intercepted, but that's not going to happen. That's kind of a fluky play, to say the least, because that was a great throw from Joe Burrow and a great route by Ja'Marr Chase, and just happened to drop it, and it went backwards for an interception, kind of one of those weird fluky plays. But I think that's a positive for the Bengals. This is the way you can do this. This is the way you can win. Now, again, you're going to have to beat Jalen Ramsey to do it, but it's not impossible. Ask Mike Evans. It can be done. It's just going to be a lot more difficult, of course. So that's kind of what I think about this. I think it's a fascinating situation. This isn't going to make or break my predictions. I do think, though, that this is definitely a point in the Rams' favor. But I have so much more that I'm going to be previewing. I want to talk about all of the stuff, the trenches and how the Rams have an advantage there. I think you have a lot of interesting stuff. I think the Bengals defense might actually match up pretty nicely against the Rams offense on top of that, so that kind of adds to more intrigue. So it might end up being a lower scoring game. There's a lot to get into. I will be making tons of videos on this Super Bowl for the next 2 weeks, previewing every little detail down. And I also will still have some, big time, full length previews like I've done for all the other games. So be on the lookout for all of that good stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts on, is this a big issue, or is it just kind of one of those weird fluky things? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.